Drums can be a very powerful add-on to your sequenced or MIDI production in Logic or Pro Tools. Really, all live instrumentation adds that human element and that organic feel to any type of production. It has a lot of energy, it has sonic qualities that you probably cannot get from most sample libraries, and not to forget the feel. So it's very important to know how to incorporate that appropriately and know how to edit it appropriately, because again, when you're dealing with human players, it is obviously not always perfect, and sometimes we have to edit it. And especially dealing with drums, we have to deal with the entire instruments being mic'd individually, which also means that every microphone has a bleed from all the other instruments coming through it. So when we're dealing with drums, we're dealing with several different elements. What you see here is a kick drum, a snare, a hi-hat, several toms, sometimes a floor tom, and then the cymbals, which is also called often the overheads. That is really more referring to the miking technique than it is actually referring to the instrument. So what do we know about drums? Well, we know drums come in very variety of materials, from wood to steel, aluminum. You see up here, you see copper, fiberglass, and all these different materials can give you very distinctive sounds. But in addition to the instrument itself, it also has a skin that actually creates the resonance and the sound. You see that a kick drum is a fairly large skin in comparison to, for instance, a snare. A floor tom gets a little closer to the size of a kick drum. So when we look at this one more time from the front view, we can see how for a right-handed drummer, which is from our perspective, he plays his hi-hat on the left with the right hand. You see that the hi-hat is on the right, snares slightly off to the middle, and the center of the drum set is really the center of the kick, not the center of the snare. And that is how usually the overheads are set up. I will show you several examples of how you can properly mic these drums. So we know that different shells, which is the outside of the drum, can cause different sounds, but the heads themselves can also be very important. As you can see here in these 4 examples, you have a clear drum head, which has a bright sound and very resonant sound. You have a coated drum head, which has more of a warm tone and resonance, long sustain. You have your controlled sound, which has a dark and tonal focus, and it's very durable. Often this is what you see on most drummers' toms. And you have the pinstripe, which is also a very common sound, especially for toms. Usually when we look for specific sounds in the individual drums, we look for a kick drum that has a lot of punch and low end, a snare that is what we call snappy, toms that have a nice long resonance or tone, but are fat sounding, not thin sounding. The thinness comes strictly through EQ usually. So all these can really change the sound of a drum. Now, why is this important for you as a producer? Simply because as a producer, you should be able to communicate with a drummer as you know the instrument as he does. It will make your sessions flow better, and in addition, you will be able to communicate what it is that you're looking for, which is often a true skill of a producer. You don't have to be a drummer to tell a drummer what you want. Now, with the sticks, it's a little easier because there's really only 2 types of sticks. Most sticks are made out of wood, though there are some plastic components used, but you can have a wooden tip or you can have a nylon tip. Very minute differences in sound, not a really big deal, and really the drummer's preference. Now, drum tuning is where it gets really tricky, and it really becomes important to have the correct tuning when you're in a recording session. one of the things that I look for is usually lower tuning on the snare than a drummer would probably use live to get a bigger sound out of the snare. The higher it's tuned, the thinner it's going to sound. And sometimes you can even get into the tonality of the toms so it matches the key of your song. It's a little bit over the top, but I've known engineers and producers that will tune their toms to specific notes of a song just to make sure it doesn't clash. Can also be done with a snare. Snare really doesn't have as much tone, but there is a pitch you can hear. So you can see here there are two types of keys. There's actually a few more, but those are the main ones. And the more accurate way of really tuning your drums is the drum dial. The key takes a lot of finesse because you have to make sure that the tension on all screws is so even and equal that no matter where you tap on the snare or tom, the pitch is the same. That is why when tuning drums, it's very important to use a cross reference or cross motion when tightening the screws. And usually this is only done in about half turns, quarter turns each time you do each screw. So you would do a half turn on 1, a half turn on 2, a half turn on 3, a half turn on 4, go through all the cycle, and then come back and do another half turn until you get to the pitch of your drum. It is essential to tune your drums way before the session. Recommended is really to do it the night before. Because as you know, with anything that is under tension, over a while it will release this tension and therefore change its pitch, which would not be desirable if you're in the middle of a recording session and you're recording the same section, the same rhythm part, drum part on a song 4 or 5 times, and by the 4th time the snare is a half step lower than it was on the first take. That wouldn't be really something that you could use at this point. If you would edit those two sections together, you would very clearly hear that there's a change in pitch and it would be unusable. Now, snares are very important for me when I track. Depending on the song, I have a very specific sound that I'm looking for. When I record country, I absolutely prefer that the drummer brings a Ludwig Black Beauty snare. It is the sound that we know from country music. And if as soon as you hear a country song that is on radio and you identify what snare it is, I would say 90% of the time it is a Ludwig Black Beauty. It's just known for that genre. There's obviously many other companies: Tama, Yamaha, Ludwig, Crest. DW is one of the biggest ones and probably one of the more expensive ones. As you can see on the top right, that EQ is called the EQ snare. That snare is called the EQ snare, and it is $1,200 just for the snare. So some of these things can get very expensive. So what are we looking here? What are we seeing here is many different materials being used, different thicknesses, different width and circumferences. It all matters in the sound. Obviously, a deeper snare that's bigger and tuned lower will sound a lot thicker at that lower pitch than a thinner snare with the same pitch. So it's a lot to take in and also a lot to understand when you are dealing with drums in your song. If you're recording a drum and it's just not matching your feel of the song, you immediately know. So here are some things I want you to think about. Is the drummer playing the right snare? Is it pitched correctly? Maybe it's the wrong skin. Maybe it's the wrong microphone, which can also make a huge difference. So here are a few things that I think are good preparations before you do a drum session, and this can be really a lifesaver in any recording session if you follow these few rules or ideas that I have observed over the 20 years I've been doing this. I usually ask the drummer to change the heads on the toms. The snare not necessarily and kick not necessarily, but especially on the toms. the night before and bring them up to pitch, even a little higher. I like to tune down to the session because the heads stretch. And when you stretch them and then at the next day bring them back down, they will stay at that pitch for a longer time. But most importantly, they should be in that environment that they would be recorded in at least for 12 hours, if not longer. They have to acclimate to the humidity and the temperature of the room. This can be tricky when you're hiring a drummer and he's just coming in an hour before the session and he had the drums in the hot car overnight and he gets into your studio, he sets them up, and for the next 3 hours he's constantly retuning the snare, which means none of your takes will be compatible with the take before. So you can see how that could be a real problem. Set the AC at a low setting, 70, 68, 72, whatever is comfortable. And try not to go in and out of the room too often. The drum's been sitting there, the drum has been tuned, you set it up finally for the session, and it's in tune, and any going in and out of the room, changing the humidity, changing the temperature, can affect the pitch. So we want to avoid as much of that as possible. Or if it happens, just make sure the doors are being closed. Especially if you have a drummer that goes outside and smokes, for instance, and leaves the back door open, he completely just threw out all that conditioning of your drums to the temperature and humidity. So be careful with those things. Now, when a drummer takes the skins off the night before, I always ask them to take a wrench and take some DW40 and make sure that everything inside the toms is tightened. You don't want that to happen in the middle of a session, which I've experienced before, where you hear a small rattle after you have everything mic'd and set up, and you literally have to take that tom off, take the skin off. Now we have to completely retension the skin, right? And take the skin off and tighten the screws inside, put it back on, and now you're just lost an hour to 2 hours studio time at $100 an hour. So it comes down to money that you have to spend that usually as a producer comes out of your budget. So be very careful getting those things done before they come into the studio. It's not too much to ask a drummer to make sure that their instrument is in perfectly working condition before they come in, but they have to be reminded sometimes because they don't quite understand what it means to lose 2 hours in the studio. Now, since I usually ask a drummer to bring all his drums, so if he has 4 snares, I say bring them all. If he has an extra 5, 10 cymbals, I say bring it all, but they're all going to be laying around. So I recommend that you have heavy packing blankets like you would find at a U-Haul store or somebody that moves. Moving blankets are usually very thick and heavy. And if you throw those over any instruments that are laying around, or sometimes even older amps that have springs in them, it can dampen the resonance in them. The room itself that you're recording the drums in can also be very important. Simply because some of the miking is done a little further, so you don't have a close distance, it's a longer distance, which means the room itself is also being recorded more than you sometimes really want to. But that means that we have to really pay attention to how the room sounds. If the room is too live, which means there's too much reverberation going on, then you should set up some baffles and gobos, which are basically movable fiberglass sound absorbing walls to reduce any bounce inside the room as much as possible, unless it's really a sound you're going for. But then you just got to make sure that it's even, that it's not, the highs reverberate more than the lows and other things, which also can be done through treatment. So the sound of the room itself is very essential. One of the biggest hurdles in recording live drums is the actual resonance of the drums themselves, like, for instance, the overtones of toms. There are several tools that you can buy very cheaply to reduce, if not eliminate, some of the ringing of the toms. And that will really help to keep your overall drum sound cleaner and easier to manage in your mix. If you can imagine a tom ringing through the entire song, or even let it be 30 seconds after the drummer hit the tom, still in your song, that can produce quite a lot of issues in your production and make it sound rather unclean and maybe even too raw. Well, if we look at these three examples here, and I'm sure there are more, but my favorite is the Moon Gel. Moon Gel is a simple gel that is fairly firm. So don't imagine it coming off on your hands when you touch it. It just feels like a soft plastic or rubber. And it's simply put on top of the skin, and it reduces the way the tom skin can actually vibrate. It works the best for me because it doesn't do too much. Tone control rings, on the other hand, I've tried several of them laying on top of a tom, and I could not tell them if they were reducing the overtones at all. So it might be just a little bit, but definitely not enough for the usage how I like to reduce it. On the other hand, you have the dampener, which to me does too much. It pushes down with a little bit of pressure on the tom, and as you can imagine, if you would take your finger and push down on the tom, you would almost completely stop the vibration of that instrument. So the Moon Gel in this example here is probably the most commonly used overtone reducing tool in the studio. Now let's talk about some commonly used kick drum mics. You will see probably 8 microphones here, and I will actually give you some sound examples of how these kick drum mics sound different. My favorite microphone on this list is the Shure Beta 52. After that, it's the D112, which work just almost on all kicks, inside or outside. Usually put them in the hole that you saw cut here into the kick drum itself. Okay, we're back. Okay. So each one of these microphones has a completely different sound, and it's really a matter of taste and song and what the engineer is used to, what he's looking for, what you are looking for as the producer. And you know, each of them produce a completely different sound. Again, to point out that the Yamaha subkick microphone is a very different type of mic that is really not there to capture any of the attack. It's really only a microphone to capture the low frequencies. So let me show you some examples of some microphones that we tested for you so you can hear what these mics sound like. Here's the kick drum, as you've seen on the image, mic'd from the outside with the Shure Beta 52. Now you will hear the same kick drum mic'd from the outside with the RE20. The next example is the Sennheiser E602. And last but not least, a Sennheiser 421. Now let's hear the same 4 microphones inside the hole. Last but not least, here's an example how the sub-kick mic sounds in the same drum setup. I want you to understand that these sounds are not processed. So if you have a chance, jump around in the video between the different kicks inside, outside, and really compare on your headphones. You will not get enough good quality out of the laptop speakers to really hear the subtle and sometimes really drastic differences between the microphones in the same position, and then compare how the same microphone sounds inside and outside. Next, let's talk about snare microphones. Now, there is a vast amount of microphones you can use on snares, and there's a lot of engineers nowadays that have a vintage collections of just incredible microphones that we will probably never hear or have ever heard of what they are, and it's kind of secretive. But there's a pretty much been a standard over the last few years of microphones that work and that are available in most studios and probably even in a lot of home studios because they're fairly reasonable in price, and produce a good quality. So we have a Shure 57, which you're pretty familiar with. It's probably a $90 microphone. It's often used also for rock vocals and other things. Then you have the Beta 56, the Beta 98, the 451. You can see an AKG 414, which is a little on the pricey side for a snare mic and would probably worry me a little bit about the drummer maybe hitting it. And then again, you will see the 421 and the 441 is pretty common microphones for drums overall. I mean, you can even see a 421 on a kick, remember? Snare, toms, I use them all the time. Great microphones. I've even done vocals trumpet on this mic. It's the same with the AKG 414. It's a very well-rounded mic that if I could only take one mic to a session and have to record everything, I would probably use the AKG 414. Let's listen to some examples of different microphones on two different snares. Well, I hope this was a good experience for you to hear how even one snare can have completely different sounds with just using a different microphone. And especially the U87, I'm sure you heard how different that sounded to all the other microphones. Well, let's talk about some tom microphones, and you will see some of the same things you have seen on the snares: 414s, 421s, KM 184s, Shure Beta 56. So you can see that the sonic quality of these of toms are kind of similar in energy and how you want to record it. Okay, now we get to a little bit more interesting things here. Overhead microphone, and we have to particularly talk about placement. Miking the overheads is a very essential part of your overall drum sound. The positioning of the mic can completely change how the overall drum set is imaged in your mix. It gives you the width of the drums, and it also gives you 50% of your overall drum sound. You can see there are several techniques that can be used in mic placement, from XY stereo, ORTF, NOS, AB stereo, and MS stereo, which is something that we will talk about a little later also. Let me show you some examples of how one drum set with the same set of microphones can sound different with the different stereo miking arrays being used. Some of the commonly used microphones for this can be large diaphragm as well as small diaphragm microphones. As you can see in this example, we used the Neumann KM184. K183s are very similar. This is a very common mic and often used for this, but I have heard U87s, U67s, and sometimes 414s, which I actually used to use a lot, AKG 451s, AT 3031s, and AT 4041s. You can also see there's some Earthworks, some Shure KSM32s, and Shure SM81. Again, there are way more microphones than I can possibly show you in here. These are just examples.
The drum set is a union of several individual drum instruments. It usually consists of a kick drum, a snare drum, hi-hats, toms, a ride, and cymbals. Because a drum set is recorded in a room with all of the individual drum instruments bleeding into each other's microphones, the recorded track should be locked to one another. You should treat the drums as one single instrument and avoid moving individual tracks, which would cause phasing issues if done improperly. Besides interfering with their original recorded phase relationship, moving individual hits from their original time position will disconnect them audibly from the microphone bleed in the other tracks, and therefore unintentionally cause what is called a flam or double hit. When the phase or polarity of two audio tracks is similar, like in two kick tracks, you will have to identify if these signals are canceling each other's frequencies out, in particular in the low end. Phase issues take practice to identify by ear, especially if it's only slightly off, but they become obvious when the signal is 180 degrees out of phase or has opposite polarity. A much easier way to check the phase of two similar or what should be phase coherent tracks is to zoom in and compare the waveforms. If the curves are moving simultaneously up and down, your audio is in phase. If the two waveforms are moving in opposite directions, then the tracks are considered out of phase. There are many degrees of out of phase, but once identified, tracks can be easily adjusted either by flipping the phase or nudging one of the tracks. An example would be two recordings of the same kick drum that will produce slightly different waveforms depending on the distance of the microphone to the source or even the microphones themselves. The task is to align the beginning of the waveforms and listen carefully to the changing sound as you nudge around. If the sound becomes fuller, then you're probably nudging towards the right direction, and if it starts to sound thinner, you're probably nudging towards the wrong direction. If your session contains 2 kick tracks, 2 snare tracks, or both, you should ensure that the kicks and snares are in phase with each other. Slight adjustments will be done most likely through nudging, while vast adjustments might be done by flipping the phase or polarity switch on a dynamic processing plugin. The microphones that capture the cymbals and rides are called the overheads. Located over the cymbals, they will capture the cymbals accurately, but also include the entire drum set. This is reason enough why they should be your main focus when imaging the individually captured drum tracks. The 2 terms we use to label the layouts are drummer perspective and audience perspective. If the drummer is right-handed, you would hear the hi-hat favoring the left-hand side in drummer's perspective. Conversely, you would hear the hi-hat favoring the right-hand side in audience perspective. Listen carefully to the soloed and panned overhead tracks to identify the perspective, and adjust your individual tracks to match the positioning of the drums in the overheads. This will maintain proper imaging of the drums and also support the phase coherency of the overheads with the rest of the drums. If it is hard to identify because the microphones were not positioned correctly, use your best judgment or look for possible tracking notes of the previous engineer. Drummers have a certain level of dynamics that gives the recording a feel different from what most programmed drums can produce. This feel often results in undesirable and inconsistent levels on kicks and snares. Several manual methods and automatic plugins are available to fix inconsistent levels. Commercial plugins like Sound Replacer or Drumagog can identify the transients of a drum track and create a new track from whatever drum sound you choose, even incorporating the previous dynamic feel of the drummer. Though these work excellent in most cases, ghost notes are very hard to identify and often are missed by these plugins. Ghost notes are the small rolls, accents, and hits that a drummer naturally performs on the snare in between the main hits, and that gives the drums the live feel and groove that they possess. This is why the most basic and secure method to do sound replacement is by hand. With the snare tracks grouped, use tab the transient to locate the zero crossing at the beginning of a snare hit and then copy it, pasting it with the same tab to transient method over weak hits. This is a simple and error-free method. When trimming and crossfading, take into consideration the length of the sample and the bleed of the other drums. When done properly, the result can vastly improve the consistency of the sound and make it easier to mix the drums into the song. After doing phase alignment and sound replacement, the timing of the performance can sometimes use a little tweaking. Elastic Audio gives you the ability to quantize audio just like you quantize MIDI. Considering all the drum tracks as one instrument, you should first create a group of the drums to avoid the previously discussed issues with phasing and double hits that could most certainly happen. Once grouped, change the Elastic Audio plugin on any of the drum tracks to Rhythmic, and let Pro Tools load and analyze the transients of all the drum tracks. By switching the view to Analysis View, you will be able to see all of the event markers that Pro Tools creates for all the transients it finds. Quantizing at this point without adjusting the sensitivity would result in wobble and other undesirable changes in the audio. With all of the drum tracks selected, open the Elastic Properties window and change your sensitivity settings to be slightly above where the analysis starts to deselect kicks and snares. It is important for each track to have identical sensitivity settings. This is why I recommend that you check the settings of each track individually after doing the previous step. Press Option 0 to open the time operation window and select Quantize. Change the quantize value to 16th note. You also have the option to change the strength of the quantization to a lower value than 100% to avoid killing the feel and groove of the drums. However, if quantized sequenced drum tracks are already present in your session, I recommend that you use full strength when you're quantizing to avoid flams or double hits between the live and sequenced drums. Once quantized, listen carefully throughout the entire song to identify possible issues like audio wobble or double hits. If you find issues, switch your view to analysis and delete event markers from the questionable area until it sounds better. Remember to keep the tracks grouped throughout this entire process. While most of the drum tracks are played fairly continuously, toms are more typically played during drum fills leading into new sections of a song. When the toms are not being played, issues can come up like audio bleed from other drums or sympathetic ringing of the toms from other instruments. To fix this, engineers used to insert a gate on the audio track. The gate's output would be closed until the tom sounded, which would open the gate's output by exceeding its set threshold. This dynamic processing method needs a signal to react to, which results in missing the immediate transient attack of the tom hit. Now, while it is true that some gate plugins found in DAWs may have a pre-listen function to avoid the loss of the first transient, the safest method to get rid of this unwanted audio is simply to erase it. The strip silence feature in Pro Tools can eliminate the sound between the tom hits, but its result is often unsatisfactory and incomplete, especially if there's a snare or cymbal bleed on the tom tracks that's as loud as the tom hits themselves. You should be careful when using strip silence and ensure that you did not eliminate necessary tom hits by mistake. The best way to check this is to solo the overhead tracks while visually inspecting the tom tracks during playback. If you hear a tom hit in the overheads but don't see a tom hit on the individual tom track, you'll have to fix your edit. Editing the unwanted audio by hand gives you more control and the ability to trim and fade each hit individually. When trimming the individual tom tracks, you should be careful to not eliminate the natural ring of the toms. Letting the tom ring naturally is more important than erasing a snare hit after the tom, which would be reduced with an appropriate fade. Though every tom resonates differently, the minimum size for each medium tom clip is about this much. And the minimum size to edit a floor tom clip should be about this much. At this point, you should have addressed most of the major issues when it comes to editing drums. This includes fixing phasing issues, replacing weak hits with stronger hits, panning the drums to their appropriate places, quantizing timing issues, and eliminating unwanted ringing in the tom tracks. At this point, you should take the time and carefully listen to the entire song. Turn on the music track, but turn down the volume so you can clearly hear the drums. Change your display to either bars and beats or minutes and seconds, and take notes whenever you hear an issue, no matter how small. It is best to address everything now and fix them before you start mixing.
So when you first listen to this, you will immediately hear that whenever you deal with sequenced MIDI quantized drums and live drums, you almost have no other choice but to quantize your audio. Because listening to this, you will hear a lot of what I call flams or uneven hits between the sequenced drums and the live drum, and that's normal, right? That would be okay if it would be just live drums, but as soon as you start adding sequenced drums, you're kind of stuck with a decision here. Am I going to leave it loose and have to fight with it in the mix, or am I going to just fix it, right? Sometimes quantizing audio depends really on the feel of the song, and it's not always a bad thing. There are certain songs that I wouldn't do it. If it's a funky thing and you don't want to really, he has a killer swing and you'll never recreate that swing, yeah, don't touch it. Find another way to do it. One way, by the way, that I can tell you that actually works, but it is as more time consuming than you possibly ever want to work on, is to actually capture the groove in a 4-bar phrase of the live drummer, make a MIDI groove out of that, and then apply that MIDI groove to your MIDI. Sounds time consuming, right? Because you would have to do it for every 4 bars. But that way you could actually quantize your MIDI to the audio. But in our case, we're just going to apply 100% quantization to those drums and line them up. So the importance is that the sequence kick and the lives kick always hit the same way. Because if not, remember what I just showed you with the phasing, if they shift even slightly, you will sometimes lose bottom end, sometimes have too much bottom end. It will be an inconsistent sound and be very hard to get a constant mix on, right? So first thing we got to do in the assignment is to check our phase. So what you want to do is either zoom in or use my memory locations, which I've made a few for you. Now, please do not change these. This is very important. They're an easy way for me to see your edits. And if I don't have these, I can't see your edits. I can't grade it. Okay? So if I go to phase alignment and it's already set up for you, all you have to do is, there's 2 ways to do it, right? Change your notch to samples. Double click this track and use your comma and period to move things around. Very simple, right? And you just get it to the point where it looks like it's lining up. And you can simply click here and click here, maybe a couple more samples. It's really, really close. I maybe have gone a little too far. Yeah. Oops, that was not what I wanted to press. Okay, let's see that. And my zero crossing is good. As you guys can see, valley, valley, mountain and mountain, and then the same here, and then it starts drifting. Okay, so that's a good phase alignment. And you see, I did not go for the beginning, because the beginning doesn't really matter. What matters is, are these waveforms lining up, not is the beginning lining up. And you see that this first wave is much shorter than this one, right? This probably has more low frequency information in it than this does, which, yeah, makes sense, right? So that's done, right? Let me show you another method to do the exact same thing. Even more accurate. Go back to your memory location. Go down to phase align. And how would we measure this? We can see the zero crossing, right? So we know that we want this zero crossing to go to this zero crossing. So we simply select it, holding shift. And it tells us that's 191 samples. So I type in 191, double click, press 1 time, and I'm perfectly aligned. Very simple, right? That's job number 1. Now, because we just shifted this track, we have a little bit of problem later on where we group these tracks trying to select all the groups. This is important to know, guys. I want you to see this. I just turned all the groups on. And when I double click, it looks like everything is selected. Let me zoom into the beginning. Do you see what's happening here? It's not all selected because they're not ending and starting at the same time. So if I would now adjust my sensitivity setting, it would not adjust it for the sub kick. You all follow me on that? So the easiest way to make sure is press B. Once you have selected this, press B. Now it's selected. Now let's go to the end. And we'll have to do the same thing here. Press B. Delete it. Now they're all starting and ending at the same time. Okay? Now if I double click, I'm 100% sure everything is selected. Okay. So I'm going to go option here. click on here and shrink these tracks a little bit. And the next step is our snare sample. So we want to turn all drums off and create a new group called snares. And here's another thing. Actually, let me delete that so I can show you something else. You would hardly ever use a snares group in the mix. So a lot of times when I make these kind of groups, I make them edit only. Why does it matter? Well, if the group is on, right? And it will only let me edit it together. See, I can't separate it here. But in the mix window, I can still change the volumes separately. Something ProLogic can't do. You can have mix and edit groups completely separate from each other. Let's go to the memory location, which by the way is Command 5. And let's go to the memory location that says pick this sample. Okay? And I opened up this window. I'm going to go right here to tab to transient. I turn that on. And you guys said last time you can't see my mouse. You can see my mouse, right? Yes? Okay. So right here, tab to transient, tab. Let's solo it. Let's take a listen. Sounds like I need to go just about that far. That sounds about right. And all I have to do is Command C. Okay, and now it's copied into my memory. Now I go to replace snare 1, tab to transient, and paste. Go to the end, put a nice crossfade on it. Go to replace snare 2, tab to transient, paste. Put a nice crossfade on it, listen to it, make sure nothing is cut off. Sounds good. Let's go to replace snare 3. Oops. Do not know what I just did. Okay. Press the wrong button. And paste. Perfect. Let's go to 4. Oh, where is it jumping to? Let's go back to 4. That looks a little off. I guess that's where the transient is. And paste. Okay. 5. Paste. Zoom out. Perfect. Let's go to 6. Paste. The reason I'm doing all of them because I want to show you something. Let's go to 7. Paste. Okay. Sounds perfect. Let's go to 8. Whoa, that was not what I wanted to press. Here we go. Okay, here we got a little bit of an issue. Can you guys hear the right symbol? Right? So that won't work. So we're going to have to go shorter if we do an edit like this, okay? And we're going to have to get more into this range here and make a bigger crossfade. And I would go with equal power and see if that fixes it. And now you can't even tell it's happening. You guys hear that? I'm not sure. Are you guys awake today? Okay. Okay, so that's all 9. Then what I want to do is click anywhere, press Command A, Shift Option 3, which consolidates this track, and now this track is done. How I will see it is I will simply look at my pick this sample and then look at all your samples and see if they line up and play them. So very, very simple for me to take a look at. Next, quantizing everything. So we want to turn the snare group off, all drums on, select everything, Command A, make sure everything is selected, open it up. Option 5 is clip elastic properties. Turn on your rhythmic mode, give it a second. It's going to take a second. This computer's super fast, so it might take a couple of minutes for all the audio to load in. This might take 10 seconds here. Okay, then I'm going to go to my analysis view, and remember, kind of zoom in and see all the extra hits and start lowering your sensitivity settings slowly. Okay, looking good. 94. Still looking good. Still looking good. 87. Okay, I lost it right there. 88. So that's my setting. Okay, did you guys see the difference? I go to 87 and I'm losing kicks. Right here. Not selected. I go to 88 and I have them. Everything is selected. Now all I have to do is option 0, 16, 100%, apply, and it is done. It's finished. The audio is all quantized. The only space that I sometimes hear problems with when it comes to elastic audio is during complicated areas like drum fills. Now, since I have to look at it and see that all your settings are right, I can't have you do what I normally would do, okay? And that is actually take it back off. And while I do that, just so you guys know, I would say commit. That way, the audio is finalized. I wouldn't do this though, the committing part, without first duplicating all the playlists, so I can always go back to the unedited version. Does that make sense? If something is wrong later on, I want to have a way to get back. I'll duplicate all the time. It's a really cool way to give yourself a path to back up to. Okay? So I would duplicate and then apply. And that makes it really easy. So you add 200 megabyte to your session. Who cares about file size at this point? Like my regular sessions, it's very interesting. At least country sessions right now, we're looking at about 6 gig per song, right? But as soon as I got to mix, I used the save copy. I'm going to show you this, guys. This is really cool, actually. And there's obviously a lot of hidden tracks in here, and there's multiple playlists of drums and all these different things. They're very hard to clean up. But Pro Tools has that figured out. If I go to save copy and I say all audio files, but only export the main playlists, not all the extra stuff, and I'll have already consolidated everything, and only select the tracks, so all the hidden tracks are not even exported. Now the average file size with every audio, with all the audio I need, is about 1.5 gigabytes. So it really is a cool way to save space when you get finished and about to archive the session. This is a very good way to archive that way. Okay, so this is all quantized, so we can go back to our regular view. Do not render this, please. And we still have our tab to transients on. So to edit these toms, I take all the groups off. We're not moving anything, we're only cleaning up. And I'm going to tab right to that first transient right here. I'm going to select about just about 2 seconds, should just about do it, because I want to have about a 1 second fade. So I'll go just about to here. I'm going to look at the audio, see what's happening here. Yeah, just about there. I'll separate by pressing B. I go to next tom hit. I go till about here. Next tom hit is right there. Is that one? Let me listen. No. Yeah, there's one. Ah. Okay. Just about here, probably. Here. Good. And the next one. Now this, when you get into empty space, I would always go a little longer because it sounds more natural and it's more exposed. And when it's more exposed with nothing else playing, you do want to hear that ring. It's very natural. Right, so I'm editing. There's a second hit happening here. I still want to get out before the snare hit. Then edit the second hit. It's a little long right here. And then the last hit. I want to stretch that one out. Oh, no, that's not the last hit. There's more. Why is that ring so important? Because we're not really editing the tom. I want you guys to get that concept in your head. we're editing the noise. What we're trying to do is get rid of the noise, but we're not trying to get rid of that beautiful ring that tom would have if it would be in the real world, right? I'm cleaning up the tom track. I'm eliminating noise. Listen, I forgot to show you. This is the noise that's playing the entire time on this tom track. Now this will be ringing throughout your trying to mix this song, right? Completely unnecessary, extra roomy sound that doesn't make your drums sound, it's bleeding. So we get rid of that. So what I did by tap to transient, I simply can now go in and delete all this noise because I got all my toms separated. Then I can go in. Wait a minute, did I just delete the wrong one? Ah, I see. Didn't separate that one. Okay. Then what you want to do is you want to give this a nice fade, each one of them, right? So click and G. Turn tap to transient off, tap to the next edit, G, 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 G. And you can experiment with some curves. Sometimes longer curves sound better. But usually that's enough for the cleaning part. The most important thing to me is that they're not too short. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. Then we're going to listen to them. The best way to check and make sure you didn't miss any is listen through the whole song with overheads and toms, and you can always see if there's one missing, right? So this still has a nice ring and then it fades out. I would almost probably prefer that to be a little longer. It's a little more natural that way. You don't want it really to sound edited in the song. Right? Same thing with the floor toms. So we want to kind of take a listen and see how they ring first. So it's just about done, just about here, okay? So if I tap the transient, whoa, I don't have tap to transient on, okay? That should be about the length. And then I tap to transient the next one. And that kind of gives me an idea what my overall length should be. That's why you should always listen to it. That's a little short for a fade. See, when I see this, guys, look how unnatural it sounds. Right? That doesn't sound like the floor tom. The beauty about a floor tom is it has a beautiful ring to it. So we want to make sure we preserve that, but at the same time get rid of any unnecessary noise that will ruin our drum sound. Right? So you have to do this for the entire tom track. There's a lot of floor tom hits, but with the tap to transient, you should get through it pretty quickly. And then just leave it like this. Don't consolidate it. Just the snares consolidated, not the toms.